what does it mean to commit the sin of marginalizing God in your life. But they still had that Bedouin intuitiveness about what is a great. They haven't been corrupted by civilization. They had innate intuitive understanding of generosity, truth speaking, courage, these types of innate understandings that come from a life that has not been corrupted by the mechanizations of power and politics. Okay, the Prophet is a man of great ethical, moral character. Then what is the contrast to that? The contrast is someone who talks nonsense. You can't count on their words. They're constantly BSing. Their speech is about their ego, not about anything else. They don't talk about principles or values like the Prophet does. They talk about other human beings, cut them down. They don't like seeing people attain what is good. Their feeling is constant of animosity and hostility towards welfare for others. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي يا رب العالمين. Okay, so inshallah, what I hope that we can achieve today is look at the Quranic message at the beginning of the da'wah, beginning of the message, and try to understand the aqidah, the system of belief of the earliest Muslims, and also hopefully talk about some of the earliest converts in Islam and what some of the notable incidents and the dynamics of the earliest conversions and some of the earliest personalities in this context. As we said in our past halaqas, although the salah as it is performed today, in the particular rituals of the salah in the form that we know it, we know that it is not revealed until the Isra and Mi'raj, or at least that is what the cumulative reports or cumulative akhbar and traditions of the Sirah and Hadith tell us. So we don't know how the salah looked like before the Isra and Mi'raj. And there is a debate that I don't want to get into between the Sunnah and Shia in particular about when the Isra and Mi'raj was. The Shia sources usually say that the Isra and Mi'raj came earlier in the da'wah than Sunni sources. Sunni sources say that the Isra and Mi'raj came quite late in the Meccan period. Shia sources say that it came earlier. But for now, that's not something that we need to get into now. But the point, though, is that clearly from the very beginning, from even before the Quranic revelation, we know from cumulative reports that Salah was something that the Prophet ﷺ would engage in. And as we said last halaqah, that after the revelation, we even have reports of him praying with Khadija and Ali near the Kaaba, out in the open. And we have reports of him praying again with Khadija and Ali, not at the Kaaba, but near Mina, where, for instance, he is seen by his uncle Abu Talib. And Abu Talib asked them, what are you guys doing? And they said, we were praying. We have, of course, reports, again, before the Isra and Mi'raj, of the Prophet ﷺ, for instance, doing sujood at the vicinity of the Kaaba. And as we will see later, that there are incidents where he is assaulted while doing sujood near the Kaaba. So my point is that most certainly the Salah, even if we don't know, we can't say that it was exactly the way the Salah is performed today, but most certainly from the very earliest stages, there is a Salah that takes the form of symbols, of acts that symbolize submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that symbolize surrendering, and the surrender, as we'll talk about in a little bit, the surrender is that you are making a conscious decision, in fact, a covenant, an agreement in which you turn your affairs over to your Maker. You are putting your trust in your Maker, and what that trust means is deference, is that you are recognizing, acknowledging that you are not a free agent with unfettered autonomy, that you are not someone who is dwelling on earth without a leader, effectively, without a someone in charge of you. And so the Salah, and why am I emphasizing this point? Because from the very first revelations of the Qur'an, we find this theme of Salah, the theme of come to your Lord in prayer is being underscored. Now, again, I'm emphasizing this because one of the most striking things about the earliest years of the Islamic message is that the collectivity, those who follow, those who've accepted Muhammad's prophecy, get together to collectively reaffirm their commitment to the divine and their surrender. In other words, they get together in Salah. And this is one of the things that is very striking, is the centrality of Salah in the life of Muslims from the very beginning. And that it's not an exaggeration even to say that Salah becomes the core activity, individually and collectively, for one as they enter into this faith. Now, we get used to the idea of ritualistically performing the salah and thinking, well, that's the extent of it. But the thing that strikes you about these earliest converts is that the salah to them was imbued with the intensity of meaning, that a relationship with Allah became everything, that that they develop a meaningful relationship with the divine, individually and collectively. So they do it individually, but it is also at the center of their activity when they come together. So it is as if saying, salah cannot be a marginal thing in our lives. And so when we look at the Quranic message, and we'll take, although we don't know exactly, precisely, which are the surahs that were revealed in the first 3 years, but we can say that there are surahs that we are fairly sure, there are surahs that we can make the safe assumption that they were indeed revealed in the 3 years. Now, what is the extent of these surahs? Like, precisely what are the surahs that were revealed in 3 years? Can we exhaustively count them? I don't think so. But we can, for instance, say that we are sure that Surah 96, for instance, was revealed in the first 3 years. And in fact, Surah 96 is often said to be the very first revelation. And I just want to take some of these surahs, particularly the ones that we are sure of. So the very first revelation, Surah Iqra, this is Surah 96. When you examine the message of Surah Iqra, the first lesson is the centrality of acknowledging how dangerous it is when human beings make the measure of right and wrong the pure subjectivities of their impulses and desires. So use your intellect, and here the Surah Iqra, the core message is use your intellect, but an intellect that is not connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an intellect that seeks whatever path it desires without the partnership of the divine, will lead to طغيان. إن الإنسان لا يطغى. طغيان will lead to injustice, will lead to, if you will, unfairness. Because طغيان, and when you say طغيان is oppression, طغيان is injustice, especially whimsical injustice. We describe any situation of oppressiveness and persistent states of injustice as طغيان. So إن الإنسان لا يطغى أن رآه استغنى, that this state of طغيان is the natural affairs of human beings when they imagine themselves self-sufficient and not in need of divine partnership and guidance. And then right away the message, أرأيت الذي ينهى عبدا إذا صلى. Now, of course, the reports in the tradition tell us that here Surah Iqra is talking about Abu Jahl. And the reports even go further and say that this is because Abu Jahl in the first 3 years, probably even in the first year, saw Muslims performing prostrations around the Kaaba and effectively harassed them and chased them away. However, and again, refer back to the tafsir if you want the full details on this, but there is the way that this was attributed, these verses were attributed, or in the occasions of revelations, in the literature on occasion, as Bab al-Nuzul, to an incident with Abu Jahl. I think it was more an issue of, after the fact, reporters saying, well, it makes sense that this is talking about Abu Jahl. But I don't believe that these verses were revealed to address an incident with Abu Jahl, but rather they were addressing a general question. And this is very important for us to understand the beginning of the message, because if you look at these at Surah Iqra, reflect upon the character, the personality that it is describing. So it is telling you, have you ever reflected upon that type of person who yanha abdan iza salla, either who forbids people from praying, or it could even mean dissuades people from praying. But furthermore, this type of personality, this type of person, when it tells you, أرأيت إن كان على الهدى أو أمر بالتقوى. So have you reflected upon this type of person who is not just in a state of unsettlement and discomfort with those who pray, but also in a state of unsettlement and discomfort with those who care and pursue guidance? So it is talking about, there are people who live a principled life, humbly acknowledging, as they use their intellect, humbly acknowledging that an unfettered intellect, that the surah starts out talking about, علم الإنسان بالقلم, and we said al-Qalam, it means the intellect. It means the pen, but it also means the intellect. And after telling us, have you reflected upon what happens to human beings when they use this intellect while ignoring the supremacy of the divine and the so the Asian the sorry the what is the word I'm looking for? The sovereignty of the divine. And indeed, so in other words, when that intellect becomes in itself sovereign, and then as that type of person who has made their intellect sovereign and has excluded the divine, not only that, but then when that type sees those who indeed live a principled life through the divine, they are unsettled by this, and in fact try to dissuade this from happening. Now, subhanAllah, of course, at the time, the Quranic interpreters said, well, dissuading it would be something like what Abu Jahl did, or something what Abu Lahab did, but otherwise dissuading through gruff opposition. But if you take the surah itself, what it's talking about is all forms of dissuading. If you come to a person and this is and tell them, for instance, stop bringing up Allah, stop bringing up what you believe Allah demands of you, or stop bringing up shaitan, or stop bringing up, in other words, stop bringing up anything outside the material world, you are among those who are dissuading. Because you've and what is remarkable is that the first revelation is anchoring you. Either you are like the Meccans, who are in theory, and this is remarkable about the Meccans, that in theory they recognize the Supreme God. But the Supreme God basically had nothing to do with anything. Their deities, their idols, had everything to do with a materialistic life and a materialistic attainment. You go to the idols because you want a material result. God, in theory, is supreme. But God basically doesn't interfere with anything, and that's why they've also excluded the idea of a hereafter. They didn't believe in resurrection or a hereafter, because then that would put God in a central position, and that would then exclude the roles of their idols. And they recognize that if you accept resurrection and consequences, then a materialistic way of life doesn't make sense. So the very first revelation, when it comes in, and then it tells you, and by the way, when it says إِن لَمْ يَنْتَهِ لَنَسْفَعًا بِالنَّاصِيَةٍ كَاذِبَةٍ خَاطِئَةٍ, this it's very interesting, because the language is remarkably eloquent, but it uses idioms that Arabs would be very familiar with, where it says that those types of people, we will take their arrogance, and the nasiya here is the forelocks in your forehead. And then Allah is saying that we will drag them by their forelocks. Now that's an idiomatic expression of basically we will break their pride in the hereafter. So the image that is immediately formed in your life, in your mind, is you have prideful people who see no role for the divine in their life. Not only that, but they're irritated by those who are irritated and unsettled and resistant to those who do see a role for the divine in life, they see them as troublemakers, they see them as unpleasant, they see them as undesirables, and then the promise that, well, the result of their arrogance in this life is that God will humiliate them in the hereafter. Now, so any Muslim coming to Islam in the very first 3 years would have to study, because we are told that they would meet with the Prophet ﷺ to perform salah and to discuss and reflect upon the Qur'an. So if you want to internalize and bring to the fore the Islamic message the way it was experienced by the very first Muslims, then if you want to walk in these steps, then put to the side the law. You don't need the law for a long time. But what you do need is the art and the habit and the joy of coming together with people to elevate your Lord, to do salah. Because it is an art. And it takes a great deal of humility. There are many people who are able to worship God alone, but they are too prideful when it comes to doing things publicly and in groups. And in this is a very important lesson, because you are saying that we want you to get into the habit of a community and a society that is humble before its Lord. And how are we going to get you into this habit unless you learn to do it as a collectivity? So the salah, and the second thing after salah is reflect upon the Qur'an. Well, when you imagine the earliest Muslims, and you imagine, as we talked about in the last halaqah, the household of the Prophet ﷺ, with Zayd ibn Haritha there, and Ali ibn Abi Talib there, and Ja'far there, and the daughters of the Prophet and Khadija, and they are reflecting upon Surah al-Qalam, Surah Iqra, depending on the... what are they studying? What is it that they're reflecting upon? They're reflecting upon what al-istighna' anillah means. What does it mean to commit the sin of marginalizing God in your life? What does it mean to... Why are there characters that are threatened by those who find themselves living a life guided by the principles of divinity? So this is just, we take, for instance, another surah that most certainly was revealed very early on, widely reported to be the second revealed surah. This is Surah 68. So Surah al-Qalam, Noon wal-Qalami wa ma yasturun, and it is, نون وقل ما أنت بنعمة ربك بمجنون وإن لك لأجرا غير ممنون وإنك لعلى خلق عظيم. Now, so we take this surah. Again, we get numerous reports that tell us, especially in this surah, it ends with a threat. First, it starts out with, again, the mentioning of the pen. And the remarkable oddity of that in a society that was largely illiterate, because it is pointing your attention immediately to the centrality of and the importance of the word and especially the written word in a society that didn't have much appreciation. And again, if you go through the tafsir, you learn how remarkable the Qur'an is in speaking out of context, or in speaking in beyond the context of its civilizational moment. So when it's speaking about the importance of the written word to a largely illiterate people, you wonder how did that strike them? How did they reflect upon that? Would we know that the Prophet ﷺ later on emphasizes literacy and emphasizes the importance of learning how to read the right, and you realize that comes from the Quran, and it comes from something as simple as the Quran alerting Muslims to the centrality of the written word in the simple expression of al-Qalam وَمَا يَسْطُرُونَ al-Qalam وَمَا يَسْطُرُونَ. It talks about reflecting upon, the reports say that it is talking about al-Walid ibn Mughira. But again, we get into the same thing, that al-Walid ibn Mughira was a wealthy Meccan. He had a number of sons. He was remarkably arrogant, remarkably haughty, remarkably elitist, and remarkably, extremely opposed to Muhammad and his message. But again, there is it certain that it is talking about al-Walid ibn al-Mughira? The answer is no. Why? Because it is talking about a personality type, and it starts out by doing several things. One, after emphasizing the written word and emphasizing that this is a true prophet, which doesn't surprise us, but then it emphasizes a theme that we have already encountered when first Khadija comforts the Prophet ﷺ, and she comforts him and says, most certainly what you've encountered in Ghar Hira is the truth. Why? Because you are a man of great moral character. You are a man of khuluq. Khuluq means you are a man, and just bear with me because all of this is going to connect like like a tapestry. When we talk about, for instance, how Abu Dharr, when he converts to Islam, what brings him to Islam, and this whole notion of so Khadija comforts the Prophet ﷺ by saying, you are a man you are of great ethical character. And because you are of great ethical character, of great moral character, it is impossible that God would fail you, or God would let you be the plaything of demons. That's what Khadija tells the Prophet. Remember that from past halaqas. And then the Quran comes, and in Surah al-Qalam, it underscores something that was one of there's an encounter. We might talk about it in greater detail later, but Abu Sufyan travels to Yemen, and there in the tradition there's a very fascinating conversation that Abu Sufyan has with people that ask him about the prophecy of Muhammad as he's visiting Yemen. And the thing that is the striking thing about this conversation is the thing that troubles Abu Sufyan and troubles his interlocutors in Yemen. And again, I might bring it into the picture later, because that conversation takes place not in the first 3 years, it takes place later. But it's that the moral character of the Prophet ﷺ is that it would be easy to dismiss this man, and it would be easy to describe him as a soothsayer. It would be easy to describe him as a fraud. It would be easy to describe him as insane if he was not a man of great moral character. And and this is often, when people say, why was the message put among these Arabs? Well, because the Arabs, although they were often failed in the test of great moral character, but they still had that Bedouin intuitiveness about what is a great. They haven't been corrupted by civilization. They had innate intuitive understanding of generosity, of truth speaking, of courage, or these types of innate understandings that come from a life that has not been corrupted by the mechanizations of power and politics and classes and laws. Because the more you indoctrinate people in system of laws, the more they become alienated from this intuition of right and wrong. And so it is very striking, and conversations like that are very striking, is that they know that it's a problem to just wave someone away. If you are corrupted by politics, you might not be bothered at all by jailing and killing someone of great moral character, because you say to yourself, well, civilization requires, the institution of power require that we stabilize power, so what if we terminate someone who never lies? But if you have that intuitive Bedouin-like, nativist-like, indigenous people-like appreciation of morality, that does bother you. And you think it is dishonorable. You might do it, because as Abu Sufyan in fact tried to do, but it troubles you. And the repeated conversations we get where the Meccans get together and say, okay, what are we going to say about Muhammad? And what bothers him repeatedly is that he's a very ethical man. So it bothers him to call them a majnoon, for instance, insane. They say, no, that's not going to fly. When they say that's not going to fly is, well, we know that that's a stretch. Okay, well, let's call him. So when you look at the struggles back and forth, what it it makes you realize, one, is that why Allah chose these people to put the message in. Because if they had a civilization like the Sassanids or like the Byzantines, that would have been completely different dynamic. But the other thing is that, look, when Surah al-Qalam comes in and it basically is telling these early Muslims, and again, just bear with me because this will come together, inshallah, like a tapestry. These early Muslims, this is your prophet. And those of you who thought that it makes sense for this to be the prophet because he's a man of great ethical character, well, you guess what? You're right. So immediately, for the Muslims who are receiving this early message, is telling you, well, you want to be like this man, model him in his moral character. Model him in the way that he speaks the truth. Model him in the way that he is constantly merciful, constantly compassionate. Model him in the way he worships, in the way that he socializes. But then look at when it describes, then it warns through speaking to the Prophet ﷺ, it tells him, don't obey a personality prototype, if you will. Who is this personality prototype? When it says don't obey, it's like telling Muslims, watch out for a personality prototype. كل حلاف مهين هماز مشاء بنميم مناع للخير معتد أثيم عتل بعد ذلك ذنيم. The description is amazing, but it is a personality type that tells you layers of meaning right away. One, this personality type, Halaf Mahin, is someone who is constantly swearing. But swearing not because they care about the truth, but they care about their self-interest. So you could say taking God's name in vain. But the expression here, halaf mahin, is not about taking God's name in vain. It is about the fact that they do not care about the importance of their words. In other words, they swear and they put no weight on the fact that they are making assurances and covenants and bringing God in to underscore basically what they have no intention of doing. But what else? Hamazin, Masha'in binamim, constantly gossiping. So constantly talking about people. And talking about people, Namim, Masha'in binamim, is a person who the way they engage socially is to constantly put people down. Backbiting, but constantly to degrade and take down. Manna'in lil khayri mu'tadin athim. And their attitude is they don't want good for people. They swear because they want good for themselves. So look at the picture that is drawn here. It's like after telling you that the Prophet is a great character, then it gives you a contrast to the character of the Prophet. Okay, the Prophet is a man of great ethical, moral character. Then what is the contrast to that? The contrast is someone who talks nonsense. Who you can't count on their words. They're BSers. They're constantly BSing. Their speech is about their ego, not about anything else. And what else? They talk about nothing more important. They don't talk about principles or values like the Prophet does. They talk about other human beings, cut them down. And what else? They don't like seeing people attain what is good. Their feeling is constant of animosity and hostility towards welfare for others. And then again, that theme that was raised in the previous surah, that they have money and they have children, and they think that they are autonomous and independent. That gives them independence from the divine. Now, and I don't remember if I brought this up in the tafsir or not, but probably I did. سَنَسِمُهُ عَلَى الْخُرْطُومِ. The reason that so many interpreters of the Quran said that this is about al-Walid bin al-Mughira, because سَنَسِمُهُ عَلَى الْخُرْطُومِ, meaning we will mark them on the bridge of their nose. Idiomatically, in idiomatic Arabic, like we saw about the forelock, it means it's a sign of insulting someone or humiliating someone when you say that I will strike you on the bridge of your nose. But the reason that the commentators thought it is fitting for al-Walid bin al-Mughira, because reportedly al-Walid in the Battle of Badr was struck with a sword on the bridge of his nose. So they said that Allah was basically predicting events that would take place more than 13 years later, when al-Walid bin al-Mughira is struck on the bridge of the nose. Now, Allah could be doing both at the same time. There's no Allah could be giving us a personality prototype and at the same time telling us that this is what's going to be happening for someone like everybody. So I don't exclude the possibility. But very importantly, what does the surah after that focus on? It focuses on a narrative, a story. And the story is about a man that a wealthy man that had children, and this wealthy man had a practice. Whenever he would cultivate, he was a farmer, and whenever he would cultivate his crops, he always had a share that would go to the poor. When he dies, his children inherit the property, basically say, well, our father used to give this share of the crops to the poor. We have circumstance. Now the farm is divided between all of us children. Reportedly, he had 2 sons, but who else was in the household? We don't know. Whatever justifications they came up with about why it doesn't make any sense anymore to give this share to the poor, well, we will stop doing this. So we'll basically not give an automatic share that goes to the poor. And God told the narrative of Surah al-Qalam is that then God punishes them by destroying their yield, their crop, and so immediately it takes you from telling you great moral ethical to an actual demonstrative example of what moral character requires. And that it tells you that your intellect can always come up with reasons why you should not continue doing good. Well, there's more of us to feed now. Well, the farm now is divided between, it doesn't belong to one person anymore. Now it belongs to several people, but etc. Whatever it is. But that the ethical principle is the ethical principle. And then the second message that you get right after that is reflect upon those people who, when they could have prostrated before their Lord, and this is when I said that salah most certainly involved prostration. This is one of the examples, when immediately in Surah al-Qalam, which is reportedly, widely reported to be the second surah to be revealed, is that it talks about those who had refused to prostrate, and how in the hereafter they will prostrate, but now they prostrate coercively. In other words, reflect upon the fact that when all is said and done, you will end up in a state of utter submission to your Lord. But see how the entire surah tied the act of worshiping Allah to the skeletal structure of good moral character. So in your mind, if you are meeting with the Prophet ﷺ to discuss the surah and to learn from the surah, none of it can be separated. If you are doing prostration, if you're a prostrating human being, meaning that you're a human being that prays, then by definition, you're also a human being that does not do namima. You don't go around talking about people and taking people down. By definition, you're not utul. Utul is a gruff, rude human being, which this surah condemns. By definition, you are not using the intellect to cut around what morality and ethics demand. By definition, you seek great moral character, khuluq azim, as the surah puts it. It is really important, and we'll take several more examples, really important to understand what these early Muslims meeting in Dar al-Arqam were studying and talking about. Because there were no laws for them, no books of law, no compendiums of hadith. Their entire engagement was to receive the Quranic revelation, meet, pray together, and reflect upon what this message that they were receiving from Allah is demanding of them. And that's everything. If you internalize that, it's an entire revolution in your consciousness and in your being. Okay, let's stop here.